My name is Ashley Franklin, and today I'm joining you from Louisiana's Old State Capitol Museum. Thank you for joining us on today's episode of High Seas History, where we'll talk about the Civil War Battle of Baton Rouge. The year was 1862. The Confederate government had already evacuated Baton Rouge and fled to the north, first to Opelousas and then to Shreveport in anticipation of the Union troops.
Rogue Wave!
The city of New Orleans fell in April of that year, and shortly after that, Union naval forces arrived in Baton Rouge and took control of the Pentagon Barracks.
Sleeper wave!
On May 29th, the Union Army arrived under Brigadier General Thomas Williams, along with infantry,
Tsunami!
artillery, and cavalry. Thus began the occupation of Baton Rouge. By June of that year, the Union Army controlled the Mississippi, south of Baton Rouge and north of Memphis. The Confederate stronghold of Vicksburg and the CSS Arkansas were all that kept the Union from controlling the entire Mississippi River and bisecting the Confederacy. The decision was made to send Confederate troops and the CSS Arkansas to Baton Rouge to prepare for an assault. Major General John Breckinridge led the Confederate land forces. The chief engineer and commanding officer of the CSS Arkansas proved too ill to travel, and thus she was commanded and controlled by alternate individuals with less experience and familiarity with her engine. On August 4th, Breckinridge's armies crossed the Comeet River in anticipation of the attack. Williams's Union troops formed a defensive line 1 mile outside of town. At dawn on August 5th, the battle began. Confederate troops succeeded at pushing the Union soldiers inward from the outskirts of town.
White horse!
Some of the heaviest fighting happened in the vicinity of Magnolia Cemetery in what's now Florida Boulevard. It was during this time that Union General Thomas Williams was killed by a fatal shot to his chest, causing Colonel Thomas Cahill to step in as commander. The Union troops were forced to fall back to a defensive line close to modern-day Interstate 110.
Graybeard!
The Confederate troops were held at bay with heavy naval attacks. It was during this time that the CSS Arkansas arrived just north of Baton Rouge.
Water spout!
The Union Army set up a platform for observation atop the Capitol's southwest parapet.
Three sisters!
From there, they used the wigwag flag system signs to communicate with the Union Navy offshore and direct gunfire onto the Confederate forces.
Like squall.
The USS Essex was anchored just a few yards north of where the USS KIDD is today. With the CSS Arkansas arriving just north of Baton Rouge, the Confederate soldiers' last hope in the form of naval support, it stalled out near today's Southern University. Confederate crew managed to get her running again and discarded iron plating, making her lighter and easier to float. As fighting continued, the CSS Arkansas made her way again, just as Confederate troops pulled back beyond the range of Union naval gunfire.
High seas!
As the CSS Arkansas was heading towards Union vessels the next day, she suffered another engine breakdown. Several Union vessels continued to guard the city as two now moved northward to close in on the CSS Arkansas. Her commanding officer, realizing that she was beyond repair, ordered the crew to deboard and set her ablaze, stopping the Union from taking control of any parts of her. With all hope for the naval support now gone for the Confederacy, the Confederate Army fell back to occupy the bluffs of Port Hudson to the north, bringing this battle of Baton Rouge during the American Civil War to a close. 2 weeks later, Union troops evacuated Baton Rouge in favor of New Orleans, but returned that fall. the city would remain in Union control throughout the duration of the war. The wreck of the CSS Arkansas lies today deep beneath the Mississippi River levee on the Port Allen side, just south of the US 190 bridge. I hope you've enjoyed this episode of High Seas History. The USS KIDD is a nonprofit educational organization that receives no regular state or federal funding. The old state capitol is operated under the Secretary of State. To book your next tour or educational adventure at either of our museum, click on the links below and remember to like, subscribe, and share this video.
Great shot!